Ever hit a ball with a Salesforce error that left you scratching your head? Then you are not alone. Today, we are diving into the most common Apex exception. These are the landmines every Salesforce developer needs to dodge. So let's see how to troubleshoot them like a pro. Welcome everyone. In today's session, we are going to talk about the most common Apex exceptions. So without wasting any time further, let's proceed with the video. Apex provides a number of built-in exception types. The runtime engine of Apex triggers an exception if errors are encountered during execution. Some of the common built-in exception types are DML exception, limit exception, list exception, math exception, null pointer exception, and query exception. Fun fact, limit exception is the only exception in Salesforce which cannot be handled. So no matter whatsoever you do, you can't handle limit exception. So you have to take all the precautions so that limit exception should not occur. So let's see DML exception. Now when any issue with a DML statement, such as if you are doing any insert and you miss the required field while performing the insert operation, then this kind of exception may occur. Now if you see, I am showing a code over here which throws a DML exception because it is trying to insert an account without setting the required field. Now you all know that account object is having a required field known as name, and here you see I just created an account variable and I try to insert it. When I will try to execute this, definitely I will face a DML exception over there. Not only that, it will also tell me that the required field is missing and the name of the required field which is missing. So let's see on the org how such kind of exception occurs. So here we are on our developer console, and let me open the anonymous window, and on this window I am going to perform a DML statement. So here I am also going to show you what happens in case of exception when we are doing some sort of transaction. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to insert two accounts basically. So account ACC1 is equals to new account. So here we are going to provide a name, and I'm going to provide a unique name. So let me show you in our org what are the different types of accounts that are already there. So let me click on the accounts, and here you can see there are 25 accounts over here, and there is no account with the name Amit Kumar. So I'm going to create an account with the name Amit Kumar. So let me provide a name over here, Amit Kumar, and certainly I will insert it. And also I'm going to create one more account, and this time I will not provide any name to that specific account. And of course I'm going to insert it as well. Now let me click on execute. So you can see an exception is occurring. It is telling me that exception has occurred in line number 7. The required field is missing and the name of the required field is name itself. So if you see, this is the line where exception has occurred. That means this line might have executed successfully. So let's go to our org and see whether Amit Kumar account is created or not. So I'm refreshing this, and you can still see the number of accounts is 25. So if you remember in the previous video itself, I told you, like in case of any transaction, if an exception occurred, the whole transaction is rolled back. So first of all, it inserted, or I should say it tries to insert Amit Kumar, which executed successfully, or the trial executed successfully, and then it tries to insert the second account. But because of the exception, the whole transaction is rolled back. Hence, none of the account is inserted. So now you saw how a DML exception occurs. So I want to share a tip over here. Always check the required field of the object on which you are performing the DML operation, because missing one could crash the whole process. Limit exception. Now limit exception occurs because of the governor limit. Now you all know Salesforce provides some governor limits for each transaction. In any case, if you are hitting that specific limit, then certainly this kind of exception occurs. As I told you earlier as well, that limit exception cannot be handled. So there is no way we can handle this type of exception. So the only way to dodge such exception is know your governor limits and always try to retain inside the governor limit. Now I'm showing an example over here. Now this example is showing limit exception. Here you can clearly see that I am running this loop for 101 times, and each time I am performing a SQL query. Now there is a governor limit of only 100 SQL queries in a specific transaction. Because I am making 101 SQL queries, definitely governor limit will reach, and I will see this type of error, too many SQL queries, 101. So the only way to get rid of this is, instead of performing the SQL query inside the loop, perform the SQL query outside it and then iterate over the list. So let me show you practically how you can handle it. So you can clearly see that I am having a statement before query just before the loop. The loop is running for 100 times, and inside the loop I am querying over the account and holding it inside a list of account, and then after the loop I am printing compulsory statement. So when I will execute it, it will execute successfully and it will show me those two statements over there. And the reason for that is I am still in the limit. So if I go to debug only, you can see before query and compulsory statement. Now some of you might be thinking how we will come to know about the limit. So when you have opened the log file, let's suppose if everything is closed, on the logs tab you can see the logs file, you can double click on it and you can see the logs. You can scroll to the bottom of this log and here you can find plenty of limit information, right? Now you can see number of so-called queries 100 out of 100. So the limit is 100 and I have reached 100. And because of that, I am very close to the limit, but still I am in the limit and that's why it worked successfully. Definitely it will increase CPU time of course, but still it worked successfully. But in anyhow, if this loop will run one more time, I will hit the limit exception. You can see that. Limit exception, too many so-called queries, that is 101. And because of that, if I see this log file which is showing too many so-called queries, go to the debug, I will see before query statement printed successfully, but once it started executing the so-called query for the 101th time, the exception occurred. Now to get rid of it is, you can certainly not have a so-called query inside a loop. So if you will ask me how to handle this, I will keep this whole statement outside the loop and instead of iterating over 101 times, I will just simply iterate over accounts. And this is how you do that, right? So it is always advised never use so-called query inside a loop until unless there is no other option to solve your logic. And even in that case, when you are dealing it, you should be careful enough to run it with the help of an asynchronous apex or something like that, so that all these queries that is being executed should not be executed in a single transaction. Well, we will learn more about that, but let's move on to the slide. List exception. Now, any issue with a list, such as trying to access an index that is out of bounds. Suppose there is a list which is not being initialized with any value and you're trying to access a value at the 0th index, even that is out of bounds. So if you are working on a list, you should be aware about the limit of the list or the size of the list. For example, if you see here, I have added one value in the list after creating it, that is 10, but I'm trying to get the value from two different indexes, that is 0 and 1. So the limit of this list right now is 1. And because of that, the last index of the list is 0 itself. So you cannot access anything from one index. And in such scenario, you will hit a list exception. So let's see on the org how such exception occurs. So right now on the developer console, let me quickly create a list and show you a list exception. So here you can see I am having a list of integer which is having 5 numbers 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, and I am iterating over it from 0 to 5 up to 5. That means there will be 6 times this loop will run. The last index that I try to access over here is 5 and the last index of list is actually 4. So definitely I will hit an exception over here, list exception, and it will also tell me the index which is actually going out of bounds. So let me click on execute. Here you can see list index out of bounds. The index is 5 and because of that I faced a list exception. I want to share a tip over here. Whenever you are working with list, always use dot size method so that you should be aware about the list size. For example, here instead of using this 5, what I can do is numbers dot size and it should be less than numbers dot size. Now I'm sure that in future as well, if any new value is increased in the list, still I will not hit that list exception. Let me click on execute. Here you go. There is one more way you can handle it is you can iterate over the collection as well. So there is a for loop that iterates over the collection. Let me quickly make it. Here you go. So you can see I am iterating over the numbers list. Each element of the numbers will be assigned to this num temporary variable and then it will be printed. So no matter how many values are there in the list, this will always work. So let me show you that by clicking on execute, click on debug only, and here you go. Math exception. Now any problem with a mathematical operation such as dividing by 0 will lead to a math exception. Now in real life, whenever we divide any number by 0, the result is infinity. But here there is no such concept of infinity if you are dealing with integers. So if you are dealing with integers and then you are trying to divide it by 0, then definitely you will end up facing an exception as math exception divide by 0. Let me show you that practically. I think I have already shown this math exception in the last video, but this is quite simple, right? So in such exceptions, definitely it is because of the value that you are providing to those variables which are performing division operation. Now I want to share a tip over here. Always check the value of the variables on which you are performing the division operation. 0 is not always your friend. The next exception is null pointer exception. Now any issue involving the dereferencing of a null variable. Now we know any variable that we create in Apex by default is assigned with null until unless we assign any value to it. So in short, we can say all unassigned variables in Apex are assigned with null. And if we are trying to perform some operation on that null variable, definitely we will hit the null pointer exception. The similar exception you might have seen in the previous video when we were using math.max operation on two variables which are actually null. So here you can see I am giving you another example of it. Suppose I created a string variable str and then without assigning any value to it, I am calling str to uppercase. So I am calling a method to convert the value inside the string to uppercase, but the string is not having any value at all. This will also lead to a null pointer exception. So if you are having any object or any variable like that which can call methods, so make sure before calling the method, check for the null. In Salesforce, we have a safe navigation operator for such tasks as well. So in case of null pointer exception, definitely will get an error like that. So my tip over here will be always assign values to the variables that you have declared. That will prevent you from hitting this null pointer exception. Query exception. Now any issues with SOQL queries such as assigning a query that returns no records or more than one record, specifically when you are assigning it to a singleton variable. So suppose if you are having a singleton variable, that means a variable that can hold only one record, and inside that variable if you are assigning more than one record or if you are not assigning any record at all with the SOQL query, then you will hit this query exception. You can see this is the example of it. So in the first one, when I'm trying to fetch the values, I'm trying to fetch all the accounts but storing in one account variable. Definitely a case of query exception. In the second example, I'm trying to fetch a record but no record is existing with that name. That will also lead to a null pointer exception. So let me show that practically to you. So you can see this is the first example. I'm trying to fetch all the accounts but holding it in a singleton object, and then when I'm printing it, if I will execute it, I will hit this query exception and it will clearly tell me that this list is having more than one row for assignment. Now let me add a criteria over here. So a few minutes back I told you that there is no account in my org with the name Amit Kumar, right? So here I'm trying to fetch that account. Definitely I am hoping that this specific account will return me one record, and I am holding it in a singleton object, so that is also fine. So hopefully this will run, but unfortunately it won't because there is no account existing, and that's why it is saying list has no rows for assignment. Now how to get rid of these errors? So my suggestions to you would be either use the exception handling technique for making such queries, or always fetch values in a list even when you want a single value. Okay, for example, in this case, if I would have used list of account, though I am not getting any value, still it will not give me any exception. It will just create a list without any value. Say because I'm printing ACC, if I go to debug only, I will get an empty list over here. And of course, if you are trying to fetch more than one values, then of course list is the best option. So these are the ways you can handle query exception. Fun fact, Salesforce developers saves 20% of their time by mastering exception handling. Now that marks the end of this video. See you soon in the next video. Till then, thank you and take care.